Okay, cool. So I'm Struan Robertson. I'm the product director at NaturalMotion. For a start, I'm not going to get to use this massive stage because I've kind of anchored myself to an iPad over here, so kind of forgive me for not walking about as much as I normally would. And secondly, kind of somewhat strangely, I'm going to start by mentioning my 2.5-year-old son, Gus, who is a cute kid. He's a lot of fun. It transpires that he's also a brilliant vector of viruses from his nursery school to me. So if I kind of go a little bit pale during this talk, or if I literally leave the stage, then we have my son Gus to thank for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, I guess this was originally billed to me as kind of an App Store versus the Android Marketplace deathmatch, with Christian, who follows me, talking about the kind of the Android Marketplace. Let's be clear, NaturalMotion have our games on both platforms. We're on the iPhone, we're on Android. We like both marketplaces. If you've got a great product, you want that product to be more than one store. But I'm going to talk a little bit about our experiences on iOS. And in particular, I'm going to talk about our moves from being a premium publisher, so we've had kind of a lot of success with that over the last couple of years, to being a freemium developer. And I'm going to look at one of our most recent games, My Horse, as kind of an example of how we've gone from premium development to freemium development and what lessons we've kind of learned along the way. So kind of NaturalMotion Games, I guess. Who are we? NaturalMotion, the company, was founded about 10 years ago, and we're pretty famous for making, I guess, animation middleware. So Morpheme is the #1 game animation engine, as it says on the slide there. That's used by a lot of people in their pipelines, a lot of traditional console game companies in their pipelines, kind of widely throughout the industry. We also have Euphoria, which is a pretty cool piece of tech that kind of takes the CPU and generates animation and kind of motion and reaction on the fly, and that's been used pretty effectively in Grand Theft Auto 4, in Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, and more recently in Red Dead Redemption. So that side of the business is still going strong, and we're still enjoying a lot of success there. But about 5 years ago, we set up NaturalMotion Games as a separate division. And NaturalMotion Games was set up to make a game called Backbreaker Football on the Xbox 360 on the PlayStation. And during the course of the development of that game, we made an iPhone version of the title. So we made Backbreaker on iOS. And that game did really very well for us. At the time, it shipped over 1 million copies. I think to date, it's done over 5 million. I think it's nearly 6 million. So we kind of got a taste for mobile development. We decided that was, we still enjoyed making console games, and we went on to make Backbreaker 2, which launched last summer on Xbox Live Arcade and on PlayStation Network. But we started to really focus our efforts on making mobile games. So after Backbreaker came Backbreaker 2, and then, somewhat incongruously, Jenga, then Icebreaker, and then more recently NFL Rivals. And NFL Rivals, that's kind of a nice little twist on the Backbreaker franchise. So it takes the kind of the gameplay that we learned about making Backbreaker 1 and 2 and put a little bit of a social twist on that. So kind of every point that you earn in the game, you pick an NFL team at the beginning, every point you earn goes towards this kind of global leaderboard of points for that NFL team. So people, fans the world over, are kind of competing to move their team up and down the leaderboard. It's a pretty cool thing. And throughout that kind of premium mobile development, we kind of relied on a few basic tenets for how to make a game. I think our CEO, Torsten Ryle, was actually talking quite recently about this, and he went through like 15 things you should do when making a mobile game. I'm not going to go through all 15 of them now. I've kind of boiled them down to 3. But the 3 things that we relied on very heavily when making those games are, 1, console quality. This is kind of like an obsession for our company. We spend an awful lot of time talking about things like self-shadowing and lens flare and depth of field and bloom and all those kind of things, and picture-in-picture as well. That's kind of a real fascination. And what we really wanted to do with all of our games is bring the kind of the aesthetic experience of a console game onto a device that's in the palm of your hand. And we've always been kind of up there with the technology. I think Backbreaker at the time did so well because it looked so fantastic as a product. And we've always been kind of up there, pushing the limits of the devices we've had. I think also making use of the controls that are available to you in the device, so the touch screen, but also things like the gyroscope and the accelerometer have also been kind of a key part of our success there. But on top of console quality, you don't just want to take kind of console gameplay and pull that over to an iOS device. So one of the big focuses that that we've always kind of had in when we're making games has been, how do we make this game work on a mobile play pattern? So I guess the typical example a lot of people give is kind of 5 minutes while waiting for a bus, and then 5 minutes while you're playing on the bus, and then you're playing on the bus on the way home. Make sure that when you're making your game, that you take that into account. So you're pushing for console quality in kind of the visuals, but you're not necessarily pushing for that same kind of console gameplay. You want something that's a little bit simpler, a little bit more digestible in 5-minute chunks. And kind of finally, we spend a huge amount of time going over the polish and the retention side of our game. So our games are kind of polished within an inch of their life. There's famous time within kind of game development of one of our previous mobile games where something was decreed to be a pixel too far to the left from the UI. And that stuff really matters to us. And that's made a big difference, we think, in how our games are played and how our games are enjoyed. And the other side of that is also that it kind of helps with retention. And retention is another thing that we focus an awful lot on in our games. So while you've got mobile and casual play sessions that are really easy to pick up, and that's a really nice part of making sure that you're developing a mobile game well, the downside to that is if it's easy to pick up, it's also quite easy to put down. So you want to make sure that you've got game mechanics in there that bring people back regularly to your game. So using push notifications, using appointment mechanics, making sure that your game is fun and memorable in the first place, because there's 500,000 other apps out there that people could be playing, and when they've put your game down, you want to make sure that they're coming back. And that's done really well for us. So over the last couple of years, we've done over 16 million downloads of those games. They average between 4.5 stars and 5 stars on iOS. The biggest new sports IP on iOS for Backbreaker. We've been pretty pleased with the success. But kind of at the beginning of last year, we saw that the world was trending towards freemium games. And we saw an even bigger opportunity there. And that's, I guess, what I'm going to talk to you now mostly about, is our move from taking the premium games that we had success with and moving them to a freemium market. So the move to freemium, I guess, this Flurry Graph is probably pretty famous. Kind of says in the beginning of last year, it was 61%, 39% premium to freemium on the App Store. By June of that year, that had flipped around to 35%, 65%, so that now 65% of the top 100 grossing games on the App Store were freemium titles. And that's just a snapshot from September of last year, which shows that 8 of the top 10 games, that's from App Shopper, were freemium titles. So that decision at the beginning of last year for us to move towards freemium was kind of borne out by what happened in the marketplace last year. It's kind of the big story of 2011, I guess, is that the world went from predominantly premium to predominantly freemium on iOS. But we didn't just want to do that in the same way that a lot of other people were doing. We wanted to do that in our own way. We wanted to take the experiences that we learned from making premium games. We wanted to take those 3 core tenets of making premium games and apply them to a freemium model. And that's where we came up with My Horse. Okay, so My Horse development, the viable and minimum viable product. I guess I'll kind of round that statement out towards the end. If I don't, then ask me a question about it, and I'll fill in the blanks. But I'm going to talk a little bit about My Horse now. So we started and we wanted to make My Horse unique. That was the thing. We wanted to make it stand out. We wanted to make something that was special, that people would remember, that people would enjoy. We wanted to do freemium our own way. And part of that, a big part of that, is the believable horse. The fact that, I mean, My Horse is a lot of things, but when you boil it down, it's essentially a very advanced Tamagotchi game. And part of the retention, part of everything that makes up that game, one of the core tenets of that game is that that horse has to be believable. People have to feel that that horse is somehow beyond the pixels on their screen, that they formed a bond with it. So we went to quite a lot of effort to make that work. We have the motion capture data from a horse. It's not that much fun motion capturing a horse. We spent a lot of time in our own tools cleaning up that motion capture data and again getting that into game. And then we spent a lot of time in-game making sure that the morpheme networks, the animation networks were right, so that horse moved in a believable way, that it was engaging, that people felt like that was a real horse, people felt like it was their horse. So few people in the world get to actually own a horse, and yet so many people kind of want to, that this game is kind of there to bridge the gap, to allow them to actually own their own horse and believe that it's real. And that led to what we call in the game the magic moment. Oops. My iPad is somewhat behind here. See if he'll reappear. So that's My Horse. That's literally my horse, Blitzen. We got dressed up for Halloween. I put a witch's hat on him. I'm not sure he was that happy about it, but I still haven't taken it off. And this is kind of, this is a screenshot of the moment when, actually that happens first thing in the game, where you load up the game and there's just a horse standing in a field. And it's moving nicely, it's twitching, it's kind of nuzzling the grass. And the game encourages you to tap on the screen and call him over. So you tap on the screen and he kind of looks up and he's not very interested. He looks back down again, you tap again, he comes over, he comes halfway. You have to keep coaxing him over to the fence. He comes over to the fence and that great big carrot kind of throbs and you give him a carrot and he nuzzles that. And you stroke his head and you flick his ears. And all of that's really nice. All of that moves well, it looks great, and all of that serves to just strengthen this core bond, this magic moment of when you first kind of engage with your horse. And it's at that point that you get to name your horse, and that kind of cements the bond. I think kind of one of the other things, so we kind of look at kind of the quality of movement and the quality of visuals in the previous slide. I think one of the other things that we took over from premium development is actually this idea of MIDI games. There's not a lot of freemium games out there at the moment that were doing MIDI games, and we wanted to take that learning that we'd had from our premium game experience and kind of pull that into a freemium game. So there you've got the horse cleaning game, and you've got the paddock cleaning game where you have to clean up poop and pull up weeds from the paddock. And both of those have proved really popular. So we know that from our premium games that those are good mechanics for bringing people back into the game. You make something that's fun, you make something that's a good short play session, they'll come back, and that's worked well for us in My Horse as well. But kind of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There are things from other freemium games that do work incredibly well, and we wanted to make sure we were using those. So we have tutorials, quests, and appointment mechanics. The rather fetching chap there is Dan, the stable hand, who is kind of like your mentor throughout the game, and he gives you these quests, and he gives you the tutorials at the beginning. And then on the other side of the screen, we have the journal, which is like a sort of a 2D interface tab that you open up. And that allows you to send your horse out on quests to go and earn cash for you, go and earn XP, and things like that while the game is off. That's kind of happening in the background. And if it's a freemium game, you've got to monetize it. So how do we monetize My Horse? We do it in several ways. Two of them are through horses and tack. And I guess received opinion perhaps is that in freemium games, something that's a cosmetic item doesn't monetize as well as something that is an item that allows you to speed up play or an item that is a convenience item. And we found that in a game that looks great, again, that has this 3D content to it, that actually, whilst yes, speed-ups and convenience items have monetized really well for us, horses and tack, so tack being like the saddles and the shoes and the bridles and things you put on the horse, have actually monetized extremely well for us as well. I say horses, there is also a zebra as well. And actually, tack in particular also ties into kind of the core loop in the game. So I mentioned mini-games earlier. Actually, the main quest line through the game is that you take your horse on kind of a series of show jumping competitions. And part of the results of the show jumping are that you get a presentation bonus. It's kind of a score multiplier. And that presentation bonus is based on how you've dressed your horse. So if you have a nice saddle on your horse, you get more of a presentation bonus. And if you just play the game, if you're just a free player in the game, then you can spend time earning enough of the soft currency in the game to buy a nice saddle and to keep going. But if you want to go through the earlier competitions a little bit faster, you can pay hard currency for some of the flashier saddles or indeed a witch's hat, and that'll allow you to progress a little bit faster. We've also got an energy mechanic in there because, I guess energy mechanics work pretty well for freemium games the world over. If you want to do a competition, if you want to kind of dress your horse, if you want to go and send your horse out on one of the quests that earns you cash, then that costs you energy. If you want to keep doing that, then you can buy him a cookie or a carrot or a sugar lump or whatever, and that will speed up his energy recovery. And then finally, speed ups. So if you enter a competition, you have to wait a little time for the competition results to come through. If you send your horse out on one of the quests, you have to wait a little time for that to complete. If you do one of the mini games, you have to wait a little bit of time for that to regenerate, and so you can do that again. And all of those can be shortcutted with a hard currency purchase. Okay, so that's a little bit about the game itself. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we kind of brought that game to market. So obviously, one, we did that with the dev team. That's pretty obvious. But during the development cycle, I guess something that was a little bit different from our console games is we focused very, very heavily on usability testing throughout the development cycle. So we did that in the fairly standard ways, where you bring people into the office and you film them playing the game and you ask them some questions afterwards, but you make sure mostly what you're learning is what you watch them do in your game. But we also gave the game to some kids to take home for a week and then later a month and asked them to fill in like gameplay diaries and their experiences throughout that. And that proved to be really, really effective for this game. So if you're looking for usability testing ideas, that's something that's definitely worth doing. We also user-tested names. For a very long time, my horse was actually called Stable Friends, despite the fact that the obvious parallel to that is that it could be unstable friends. And that was winning in a lot of the focus groups that we did. That came out kind of #1. And for various reasons, my horse hadn't been included in those earlier focus tests. And we kind of did a last round of focus tests and last round of usability tests. And we included my horse. And it just came out far and above the other ones. And so we ended up going with that. Focus testing of icons. That's really important. I think everyone knows that the icon is the first thing that people see. It is the presentation within the App Store, and that's a really important part of making sure that your discoverability is high. So I think I've probably seen more icons for this game than there are icons on the rest of the App Store together. We went through a heck of a lot of them, but we're pretty pleased with the end result. And then finally, we did the same thing for the logos and the splash screens. We focus tested an awful lot of those. And then to emphasize the point, we did it all again. And that is quite a lot of effort to go to. But that was worth it. Because at the end of all that, we got an Apple Global feature, which is just about the best feature you can get from Apple. We've also been featured several times since by Apple in kind of new and noteworthy, I think in kind of high-tech games and graphically great games. We're in the Valentine's promotion at the moment. We got a lot of significant media interest. Because our game was different, because it was unique, and because it kind of had this initial Apple feature, we got a lot of mainstream media attention, which helped, particularly helps with the casual game. We've generated significant revenue. We don't really talk about the revenue numbers for this game, but we've generated significant revenue from the game. It's also got incredible kind of further development potential. The people who play My Horse are pretty dedicated. We get an awful lot of suggestions and requests for new features through from our gaming community, through our community desk. And we've also got a lot of ideas for ourselves about how we want to take this game forward. And I think what's nice is that spending the time getting the initial launch right meant that we've got this solid platform for further development. It's got over 500,000 DAUs, and it's got over 8 million downloads. And the 500,000 DAUs, actually, from one game, that puts us as one of the top mobile publishers in the world. So making sure that we got this right the first time round has been very beneficial from that point of view. I guess the other side is making sure that we treat this as a service. So this is kind of an ongoing game. We don't just launch and fire and forget. You want to make sure that if you've got people interested, if you've got engaged users, you want to keep them coming back, and you want to make sure that you're rewarding those people who come back. So we have a large analytics team on the game. That's basically a must-have these days if you're going to have a freemium game. I guess most people here know that. But make sure your analytics team, we have a full-time analyst and we have a full-time product manager on the game. Make sure those people are asking the right questions. Make sure when you launch the game, you've got the questions that you want to ask immediately to make sure that you've got your initial funnels correct, that you've got the game balancing side of things correct, you've got the pricing correct. You should be asking questions on an almost daily basis to make sure that everything you're putting out in the game is as good as you can get it. There's an example here. This is from Jenga, actually, that we launched with the More Games button that was red. That was red. It fitted the UI. It looked good. We were all pretty happy with that. And for some reason, I actually can't even remember why, we tested a More Games button that was blue, and that turned out to give us 15% more hits. Small things can make a pretty big difference. 15% is not to be sniffed at. So making changes, experimenting with things, and learning from those changes is a really critical part of an ongoing service. But also just make sure you're continuing to develop. We have a full team led by a product manager. We have engineering, analytics, art and design, and also the stakeholders from the company kind of committed to the ongoing development process of this game. They bring new features. So we've got some new mini games coming out soon. There's new content. There's lots of balancing to make sure if there are areas where people are getting stuck or people maybe don't know what they need to do, that we've changed the tutorial text, that we've changed the values of the XP earnings so that people can get over a particular hump that they're facing. And also kind of do seasonal stuff. That's a really big win, I guess. Again, that's pretty obvious from the number of people that do that on the App Store. We've just been featured in Valentine's. We got featured at Christmas, I believe. We did some Halloween tack, hence the witch's hat. All of that stuff is pretty beneficial. So just to kind of round this out, what did we learn from the process? We'll launch with something that's strong. And I guess coupled with that, be unique. I said I was going to round out the the viable bit in minimum viable product. MVP development, the idea of launching something that's kind of the smallest set of features you feel is viable to launch a game with, is great, because it allows you to get something out there and then respond to what people are actually playing in your game, respond to how people are playing your game, and develop further features from that. It's quite lean. It means you're not wasting development time on features up front that maybe people don't want. But the flip side of that is that when you launch a game on iOS, that's your best time to get featured. And if you get featured and you get all those people through your game at the beginning, and you haven't launched with a thing that is right, that is the best game that it can possibly be, that your lifetime value isn't high, that your retention, your possibility for retention isn't high, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So yes, launch with an MVP, take that approach, but make sure you know what the viable part of that actually is. Metrics, I've just talked about that. You've got to have metrics in a game. You've got to be, don't just say you do metrics, actually do metrics. Make sure you're studying them, make sure you're looking at them. We review them on a weekly and a daily basis. And plan your data push strategy. So My Horse, we can push data, we can change the UI on the fly, we can change pricing, we can change balancing, we can add new 3D content to the game. All of that's really good, but don't do that at the cost of your users, right? If you're going to push new content to a game, make sure that the users have an option to opt out of it if it's over a few meg of data, because people don't want to download that on an Edge connection or a 3G connection. Make sure it doesn't inconvenience them. A great example of this is make sure if you want to change the color of one button in the UI, you don't have to download a whole new UI in order to do that, right? Make sure your game is structured and engineered in such a way that you can do that. And finally, having an offline mode really helps. So I know a lot of the top grossing games, Tap Zoo, Tiny Zoo, a lot of the store make games are all online all the time. And that works really well for them. But one of the reasons I think we've got such good DAUs is the fact that you can play My Horse offline, because that means that people with iPads, that means that people with iPods who aren't connected, who are on the bus or who are playing at school, are able to play without having a Wi-Fi connection. And that is kind of it from me. I'm going to leave the floor open to some questions, other than just to say briefly that we are hiring at NaturalMotion. We're basically hiring everyone everywhere. You can visit our website, or you can come talk to me afterwards, and I'll be glad to talk to you about any opportunities with us. So if there's anyone who's got any questions.
So, thank you, Struan. Anyone? Questions? Come on, we can do it. We can ask questions. Ah, there we go. We have a winner.
Hi there.
Hey.
When you decided to go the freemium way, during your design process, do you feel you were limited due to this decision, you know, in terms of, okay, we want to do this feature or this mechanic, and oh no, maybe we have to adapt it or just drop it because of the freemium model? Or
I don't think so. I guess if we'd maybe, I think we're trying to put freemium into a game or concept that was premium. I think you end up making some of those trade-offs there. But I think if you design a game to be freemium from the ground up, then the design experience is still very interesting. And like I said, I think we didn't want to go out there and try and be a copycat. We wanted to do something that was different. So that was a pretty interesting design process from that point of view. I don't recall that we ever dropped any features as a result of the game being freemium, for example.
thanks.
Cool, I think we have one back there.
Hi, Struan.
Hey.
Thank you for the great presentation.
That's all right.
Just a question. In terms of development cycle, can you tell us from the concept to the street date and pre-production? Because it seems that you really invest time on iterating, that you need to be, I mean, it needs to be perfect before you move into full production. I mean, this is the message we get. So if you can explain us.
So yeah, I mean, My Horse was, I guess, a little different in that I think it spent some time in the embryonic stage while we worked out what we wanted it to be. So the pre-production period was, it's longer then than it is now for the games that we're making, because we were experimenting. So I think it kind of spent about 3 months in pre-production at the time. There was actually, the development on My Horse started before I joined the company. So I think it was about 3 months in there, and I think probably from there about 6 to 8 months to actually deliver the game from that point. But yeah, we spend a lot
That's
of time.
fast.
We spend a lot of time in pre-production, but we don't consider that to be the point where you stop doing the usability testing, essentially. So yes, we did a lot of the usability testing, we did a lot of the focus testing, but we were doing that. We changed the name about a month before we launched the game. If that might even be generous, it might have been weeks before we launched the game.
Thank you.
Cool. Any more?
There's one over there.
Oh, okay. Yep. Go ahead.
Hi. I mean, for sure you do not have to answer, but what does that mean, significant revenue? Could you give us an idea? Let's say in digits per month or something like that.
Well, I'm glad you said I don't have to answer that. We're not at a point where we're giving out revenue figures, and that's basically kind of, I'm not even going to kind of go close. I'll say that there were a couple of slides that were cut from here, so something we have said publicly. We launched a game called, we launched NFL Rivals a week before My Horse, and NFL Rivals was featured in New and Noteworthy in an NFL game. It was top 10. It did really well. We were really pleased with the revenue. My Horse launched a week later and was doing 10 times the revenues of NFL Rivals. So that's pretty much all we've said publicly on that.
Okay, so you can live from that.
You can go and do some maths if you want, yeah.
Thank you.
Great. 10 times. That's great. I mean, so any more? Cool. So I mean, I've got a question. I think there's a trend that seems to be happening in the conversations we've had this afternoon. So if you think about what Mark was saying about Fish Labs and the way that they're working and the increased kind of effort that's involved in creating a better and better quality, I think you've reiterated that in terms of quality statements. What I'm finding really interesting is it sounds like we're kind of reaching an era where it's going to be harder and harder for the one-man band to be able to continue to create games. Is that fair? I mean,
It is and it isn't, I guess. It's going to be harder and harder for a one-man band to create My Horse, right? Because that wasn't the one-man band that made that game. But there is still, the brilliant thing about iOS, the brilliant thing about Android is there are still so many opportunities for games that aren't necessarily 3D. They won't necessarily be as successful as where we believe that market is going, but there's still great potential for people to have fun and put indie games out on those platforms and one-man bands to do well. And I think you only have to look at Temple Run to look at what is not far from a one-man band with success that has essentially kind of decoupled itself from the App Store norms. That's going to be a runaway freight train, and it'll be a
no,
hard
I think
thing
that's
to
a
catch.
really good point, really valid. Yeah. I mean, there's so many tools out there nowadays to make it as easy as possible for designers to be able to get their ideas down into an application without necessarily being hardcore coders.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by Mark's comments of 4.5 man-years of art. That's kind of a terrifying prospect, I think, for mobile developers. So.
But if you take a comparison with some of the console games,
Yeah.
that's actually relatively small, still, to this day. Okay, last chance for a question. You'll regret it if you don't raise your hand now. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, thank you very much, Sean. That's been great.